Hey everybody, welcome back to another inside look at the book El Deafo. Today we are doing two chapters, chapter 16 and chapter 17, all in one beautiful video. That's because chapter 17 is very short, and it also is a direct continuation of what happens in chapter 16. So it made sense to put these two chapters together into one video. Chapter 16 is one of my very favorite chapters of the whole book because it's very close to being what actually happened. And this chapter, if you've read the book, this chapter is the curly pencil incident, which was a very big moment for me in my childhood. It was a very upsetting and traumatic moment, and one that for a long time I was very ashamed of, and for so many reasons. But I do love this chapter, and for the most part it is all true, with a few little allowances, timeline allowances and things like that. But the chapter starts with me telling Mom on page 178 that I had done really well on the flexed arm hang. Wow, I aced it. I got it in 64 seconds. I was up there for 64 seconds. I'm still excited thinking about those 64 seconds. But anyway, while I'm telling Mom about that, my father returns from a medical convention. He gives me a gift, and it's all wrapped up, and I'm hoping, of course, that maybe it's the phonic ear. Did he bring me back the phonic ear? And I know it was ridiculous to think that, but that's the way my kid mind worked. Like, maybe my dad has so much power that he could get the phonic ear back for me. So I open it up and I'm hoping that it's the phonic ear, but instead, as we see on page 179, it's a curly pencil. And not just any old curly pencil. It wasn't rubbery, it was actual wood. It was a wooden pencil that curled around, and it had a number 2 lead in it. It had an eraser, you could write with it, and it was amazing. I was enamored with this pencil. I loved this pencil so much, and I couldn't wait to share it with all my friends the next day. And on page 180, you see me going to sleep and imagining showing off this wonderful curly pencil to all of my friends at the bus stop. It was like trying to get to sleep on Christmas Eve. I really could not wait to share it with everybody at school. And that whole page is just me, go, get ready, go, get ready, quick, go. And I didn't have to put on the phonic ear, so that just helped me get out of the door that much quicker. So I couldn't wait, and I also couldn't wait for the possibility of sharing the curly pencil with Martha, because stuff like that was right up her alley. She would have loved it as much as I did. So I'm racing to get to that bus stop, and on page 181, I get to the bus stop, and I'm disappointed because Martha is not there. If you recall from previous videos, at this point she had stopped riding the bus because of the eye incident. So we've gone from the eye incident to the curly pencil incident, and she did not get to be part of the curly pencil incident because she was not there. She was at home hiding, trying to avoid me. But anyway, I'm still so excited. There's all these people that I can share it with, and so I share it, or I show it to everybody, and then, I'm kind of braggy. My dad gave this to me. He came back from this medical convention, and look what I got. I got a curly pencil. and I tell everybody that they can look at it, that they can pass it around, but be careful. Please be careful. I love my curly pencil. So I pass it around, and it goes from person to person, just like on page 182. And everybody is very respectful, and they're probably not as impressed with it as I am, but everybody's very polite. Oh, isn't that nice? That's a very nice pencil, Cece. Probably just being nice. And Mike Miller looks at it, and even he says it's amazing. Oh, be still my heart. But then it gets into Johnny's hands. And Johnny was really his name. So Johnny, if you're watching this, this is for you. Ugh. And Johnny was actually 2 or even 3 years younger than me. And he lived up the street a little bit and was always at my bus stop. And for some reason, and I bet you anything, that if I talked to the real Johnny today, he would have no idea why he did it. And he probably doesn't even remember it. I bet you $1 that the real Johnny doesn't remember. But anyway, he was about 3 years younger, so maybe it was an act of immaturity. But he gets the pencil, and I say, you know, be careful, don't break it. And what does he do? Crack! Just like on page 183. And this panel was one of the most fun panels to draw. And you'll notice that the word crack is really tiny because the sound of a pencil cracking is very tiny. You can probably barely hear a pencil cracking. I'm not even sure that I would hear a pencil cracking even with my hearing aids in. But the speech balloon that surrounds that tiny little crack is big and yellow with mean red lines, and that's because that's what the emotion sounded like when that pencil was broken by Johnny. The emotions made that crack sort of the crack heard around the world. So that was a very fun panel to draw. So Johnny broke my heart. He really broke my heart, and he broke my pencil. And on page 184, even though I tried so hard not to cry, what did I do? I started crying. In fact, I was sobbing. And when I was a kid, I worked very hard to never cry. And one of the reasons for this is because my older brother and my older sister, anytime I did cry, they would call me, "Cry, baby. You're a big baby. Cry. Why don't you cry?" And so, why would I cry? I never wanted them to say that to me again. So I never cried. In fact, I didn't even cry when I saw the movie E.T. Come on, who doesn't cry when they see the movie E.T.? So there I am in the theater. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. And I saw that movie just maybe last year. Only the second time I'd ever seen the movie E.T. And I cried and totally made up for that time when I was a kid and I didn't cry at the end of E.T. Anyway, I'm just trying to convey to you how much I hated to cry. And I especially hated to cry in front of other people. And what am I doing on page 184? I am crying in front of all the kids at the bus stop, including the one and only Mike Miller, the one person I most want to impress. Oh, the agony. How embarrassing. So I run away, "Mama!" shouting for my mother. And on page 185, I get home, still crying, and I explain everything to her. And I do remember taking those 2 halves of the curly pencil that curly pencil that I loved with all my heart and throwing them in the trash can. Just furious. Too many emotions that morning. And my mom said, you know, you look pretty upset. You can stay home if you want to. But I'm like, stay home and miss school? Oh, no way. I never wanted to miss school, and especially without the phonic ear, school was already so hard. I couldn't miss what teeny little fraction of school I was getting. So I decided to go back to school, and you'll see my brother and my sister, who at this point are already in high school. I'm in elementary school. They're already in high school. They drive me to school. This probably didn't happen, but I wanted my siblings to make another appearance somewhere in the book because they deserve to be in the book, maybe a little more than they are here. But anyway, probably my mom drove me to school. And on page 186 and 187, it really did play out very much like it is in the book. So I'm actually going to read this whole section to you. So, when I get to school, I go to the gym like always and sit in the bleachers. But no way am I sitting with the neighborhood kids or any other kids for that matter. And this was true. I almost always sat with the kids from my neighborhood. We would just sort of stick together as a group and just wait together until the bell rang, and then we would go to our classes. I stare straight ahead and try not to cry anymore. But suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody coming. It's Johnny, and he's being pushed toward me by Mike Miller. And Mike says, "Okay, Johnny, apologize." Sorry about the pencil. I don't know what to feel. And then Mike says, listen, I'm sorry about what happened. It was a really cool pencil. I don't know why he felt like he had to do that. Should I feel happiness because Mike Miller really is nice and might actually care about me? Or shame because Mike Miller witnessed the whole thing? Well, I gotta go. And he just feels sorry for me and my whole crybaby deaf kid self. Bye. Hope you feel better. And now he's gone. Mike Miller was sitting right here beside me, and I never said a word. Rats. Bye. So it really did play out this way. I remember looking up, and there's Mike, and he's pushing Johnny towards me, and he, just like in the book, you apologize to her. And Johnny did, and then Mike sat with me for just a few minutes, and I was just speechless that anybody could be that brave and that kind. Back then, we didn't have any kind of anti-bullying campaigns or anything like that. It felt more like, you know, each person to his or her own. And we weren't really shown that we could stand up for each other and stand up for things that we felt were wrong. And I definitely was no good at doing that. I couldn't do it for myself. How could I do it for another person? So I always think about Mike being a really remarkable person, that he would do something this kind and this nice for a classmate and a neighbor. So I really, really do like this chapter. And if you're watching this video, you should definitely stick up for your friends if you can. But at the same time, I do know how hard that can be, especially if you're like me and a non-confrontational person. So, but there's no harm in trying. So that's the end of chapter 16. And now we will move on to chapter 17. And what's interesting is that I've sort of shifted the timeline. In real life, chapter 16 did happen when I was in the 5th grade, but chapter 17 was actually something that happened in the 3rd grade with Mrs. Eichelman, because it is Mrs. Eichelman who had quiet math, which is what chapter 17 is all about. And it is Mrs. Eichelman who had the apple on the chalkboard, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So it was Mrs. Eichelman, 3rd grade, that this chapter is based on. It was Ms. Sink, my 5th grade teacher, that the previous chapter was based on. So this is a really good example of how someone who is telling the story of their life might move around the pieces in order to make a more entertaining read for their audience. So it's an example of episodes of a person's life being true, and you're capturing that episode in that moment, but you're moving around the pieces so that it flows better. Anyway, let's see what my notes say. Oh, right. I'm actually going to read this chapter in its entirety because it's so short, and then tell you just a little bit more about it when I finish. So, chapter 17. The rest of that awful morning passes by in a blur. Huh? I said, Mrs. Finkelman says it's time for quiet math. Thanks. Quiet math equals we quietly do our math while Mrs. Finkelman goes somewhere else for 20 minutes. I used to be able to hear where she went. And so we see all this stuff that Mrs. Finkelman used to do, but not anymore. Not only is school hard without the phonic ear, it's boring too. Anyway, most of us work while Mrs. Finkelman is gone, but sometimes a few of us don't. Hey, Mike, catch! Whoop! Sometimes the bad kids remember to watch the door for Mrs. Finkelman. God bless my underwear, they're the only pair I wear. Stand beside them and guard them. But sometimes, like today, they forget. Children, just what is going on here? Back to your seat, right now. Better look busy. Mrs. Finkelman stands in front of her giant apple painted on the blackboard. I am so disappointed. Pa, JP, Mike, Becky, Mandy, I'm writing your name in the apple. And as you know, a few rotten spots spoil the whole thing. Goodness, let's put our things away and get ready for lunch. Mike sure looks embarrassed. I wish I could talk to him and make him feel better, but he probably thinks I'm a big crybaby after this morning. Just talk, Cece. Mike? And you'll notice those dotted lines around the Mike. That's something that a lot of comics writers do to show that somebody is whispering. You're trying to make it look like a whisper. So, Mike? Yeah. Come on, talk. Just say, and this is me thinking, just say, thanks for what you did this morning. And so you'll see, thanks for what you did this morning, thanks for what you did this morning, thanks for what you did this morning. That's going over and over in my head. And then Mike says, I'm ready to eat. Yeah. Yeah, pathetic. How can I ever be friends with him if I can't even talk to him? Rats. So that is how chapter 17 ends. And I really like the third panel of page 191, because of all the, you know, what your brain is trying to tell you to say. You know, just say it. Thanks for what you did this morning. Thanks for what you did this morning. And the words just won't come out because you're too shy, or you're too much in awe of the person, or who knows why, but the words won't come. That was me in a nutshell, especially around Mike Miller. And it's still me to some degree now, because once again, I'm a little bit of a non-confrontational person. But I have come a long way, and I'm much braver about speaking out. And that apple that's painted on the blackboard on page 190, that was absolutely true. And I lived in fear of that apple. Absolute fear. I did not want to ever get my name in that apple. And I put this chapter here because it was really important to establish what quiet math is, because it comes up later. And if you've read the book, you know that it comes up later. And it was also really important to show that apple and what that apple means, because it becomes very important later as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call foreshadowing. The word of the day, foreshadowing. That was chapter 16 and chapter 17. And I want to thank you once again for joining me here. We're getting near the finish line, ladies and gentlemen. We're almost done with our inside looks at El Deafo. And maybe I will time it right, but by the time these videos are finished, you will then get to check out my El Deafo Superpowered Edition that has lots of fun little extras that haven't even been in these videos that you might really enjoy seeing. It's essentially the same exact book, but with several pages, I think a good number of pages. I can't remember how many pages, but a significant amount, full of fan art and fan letters and process pictures and some reference photos that weren't even in the videos. So I think you might enjoy it, especially if you have enjoyed watching these videos. So thank you for joining me, and the next time we meet, we will be talking about chapter 18, which is, what is chapter 18? Oh, chapter 18 is the return of the phonic ear and getting to wear pajamas with Mike Miller himself. Bum, bum, bum. So, thank you so much, and stay safe and stay well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.